The room went dead silent when Sebastian Hale walked in. Not because of his title, Duke of Greystone, but because everyone knew what he'd come for. A wife. Any wife. Whichever daughter could give him an heir first. He didn't care which one. The Rowan family stood frozen like cattle at auction, their desperation painted across every face. Except one. Eliza Rowan burst through the door late, mud streaking her skirts, and locked eyes with the man who thought he could buy her sisters like livestock. What she said next would shatter everything, and neither of them would ever be the same. If you want to see how a girl with nothing but guts takes on the coldest man in England and wins, stick around until the end. Drop a comment with your city so I know you're watching. Hit that like button. Let's go. The Rowan estate wasn't an estate anymore. Not really. It was a ghost wearing the skin of better days, held together by rotting wood, fading paint, and the stubborn pride of a family that refused to admit they were drowning. The grand entrance hall, once a monument to old money and older bloodlines, now smelled faintly of mildew and desperation. The chandelier overhead hadn't been lit in years. Too expensive. The rugs were threadbare, their once vibrant patterns reduced to muddy browns and grays. The portraits on the walls stared down with the kind of judgment only dead ancestors could muster, their eyes seeming to ask, "How did it come to this?" And today that judgment felt heavier than ever, because today Sebastian Hale, the Duke of Greystone, had come calling. Margaret Rowan stood in the center of the parlor, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She was the eldest daughter, 23, and she knew exactly what this visit meant. So did everyone else. Her mother, Catherine, sat perched on the edge of the settee like a bird about to take flight, her face a mask of forced composure that was cracking at the edges. Her father, Lord Edward Rowan, stood by the fireplace, staring into the empty grate as if it might offer him an escape route. It wouldn't. There was no escape from this. Margaret's two other sisters, Anne and Beatrice, flanked their mother, their faces pale and drawn. Anne, 21, kept smoothing her skirts over and over, a nervous habit she'd never been able to break. The fabric was worn thin in places, carefully mended where seams had split. Beatrice, 19, looked like she might faint or vomit. Possibly both. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes glassy with barely suppressed panic. And then there was Eliza. Except Eliza wasn't there. Catherine's eyes darted toward the door for the 5th time in as many minutes. "Where is she?" she hissed under her breath, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. Edward didn't answer. He didn't need to. They all knew where Eliza was. She was down in the village, mucking about with the tenants, probably elbow-deep in some half-dead garden or helping some widow fix her roof. She was always down there, always late, always covered in dirt, and completely unconcerned with propriety or expectations or the fact that her family was falling apart. Always impossible. "She'll be here," Margaret said quietly, though she didn't sound convinced. She wasn't sure of anything anymore. Catherine's mouth thinned into a razor-sharp line. "She'd better be. If she ruins this—" "She won't," Edward said, but his voice lacked conviction. Eliza had a talent for ruining things, usually without even trying. The sound of boots on marble echoed from the entrance hall, sharp and deliberate, heavy, each footfall precise, measured. A man who didn't need to announce himself because his presence did it for him. The butler, old Jameson, who'd been with the family for 40 years and was probably staying out of loyalty more than pay at this point, appeared in the doorway. His face was carefully neutral, but Margaret saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Pity, maybe. Or resignation. "His Grace, the Duke of Greystone," Jameson announced, his voice steady despite everything. Sebastian Hale stepped into the parlor, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with the kind of build that suggested he could break a man in half without much effort. Broad shoulders, long legs, the posture of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. His coat was black, perfectly tailored, and probably cost more than the Rowans had spent on food in the last 6 months. His waistcoat was a deep charcoal, his cravat pristine white and tied with mathematical precision. His hair was dark, cropped short in a style that was practical rather than fashionable. And his face was all hard angles and cold calculation, sharp jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. But it was his eyes that made Margaret's breath catch. Pale gray, like winter ice, and just as unforgiving. They swept the room once, clinical and assessing, taking in every detail with the kind of efficiency that made her feel simultaneously invisible and completely exposed, like he was inspecting livestock. "Lord Rowan," he said, his voice flat and precise. Not unfriendly. Not friendly either, just transactional. The voice of a man conducting business. Edward stepped forward, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes and looked more like a grimace. "Your Grace, thank you for coming. We're honored to—" "Let's not pretend this is a social call," Sebastian interrupted, his tone not unkind but utterly devoid of patience for pleasantries. The words landed like a slap. Catherine flinched, her carefully maintained composure cracking further. Anne looked at the floor, her hands trembling in her lap. Beatrice's breathing quickened, and Margaret saw her sister's fingers dig into the fabric of her dress like she was trying to anchor herself to something solid. Margaret stood perfectly still, her spine rigid, her face carefully blank. She'd prepared for this. She'd known it was coming. Her father had warned her 3 days ago, after the creditors had started circling like vultures, their letters piling up on his desk like death sentences. The estate was done. The title was meaningless without money to back it up. The Rowan name, once spoken with respect in drawing rooms across England, was now whispered with pity or scorn, and the only thing left to sell was them. Sebastian's gaze moved to the daughters, one by one. Margaret felt his eyes on her, cold and evaluating, like he was calculating her value down to the penny. She forced herself not to look away, to meet that icy stare with something that resembled dignity. His gaze lingered on her for a moment, assessing her age, her posture, her suitability, then moved on. Anne stared at her hands, her shoulders hunched. Beatrice trembled, tears already gathering in her eyes. He took his time, didn't rush, just stood there, silent and imposing, while the Rowan family held their collective breath. Finally, he turned back to Edward. "I'll be direct," Sebastian said, his voice cutting through the suffocating silence. "I need an heir. I don't have time for courtship or sentiment. I'm offering a marriage contract to one of your daughters. Whichever one agrees. The terms are simple. She becomes my duchess, provides me with a son, and in return, your debts are cleared. Your estate remains intact. Your family survives." Catherine's breath hitched, a sharp intake that sounded loud in the quiet room. Edward's jaw tightened, the muscles working beneath his skin. Margaret felt something twist in her chest, something hot and ugly and utterly humiliating. Shame, maybe, or rage. She wasn't sure which. "You're offering to buy one of us," she said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Sebastian's eyes flicked to her. He didn't look offended, didn't look surprised, just looked at her with that same clinical detachment and said, "Yes." No hesitation, no pretense, just brutal, unvarnished honesty. Anne made a small, choked sound, pressing her hand to her mouth. Beatrice looked like she was going to be sick, her face going from pale to green in the span of a heartbeat. That's monstrous," Catherine whispered, her voice breaking on the last word. "That's reality," Sebastian said flatly, not unkindly, but with the air of someone stating a fact as obvious as the weather. "You're 3 months from losing everything. I'm offering you a way out. Take it or don't. I don't care which." Margaret's hands curled into fists at her sides, her nails biting into her palms hard enough to hurt. She wanted to scream at him, wanted to tell him to go to hell, to take his cold, mercenary offer and shove it somewhere the sun didn't shine, wanted to throw him out of their house and slam the door behind him and pretend that none of this was happening. But she couldn't, because he was right. They were drowning. The creditors were closing in. The tenants were suffering because there was no money to maintain the land, to fix the cottages, to help when harvests failed. Her father drank himself to sleep most nights now, trying to forget the weight of a legacy he couldn't save. Her mother had sold most of her jewelry already, piece by piece, trying to keep up appearances while everything crumbled. And Sebastian Hale was the only lifeline in sight. "I'll do it," Margaret heard herself say, the words coming out steady and clear despite the roaring in her ears. The room went still, utterly, completely still. Sebastian looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You?" "Yes." Her voice didn't shake. She wouldn't let it. "I'm the eldest. It's my responsibility." It was what she'd been raised for, wasn't it? To marry well, to secure the family's future, to do her duty. Never mind that marrying well had always implied some degree of affection, or at least mutual respect. Never mind that she'd once dreamed of marrying for love, or at least for something more than a transaction to clear debts. Those dreams were luxuries, and the Rowans couldn't afford luxuries anymore. Catherine opened her mouth to protest, her maternal instincts warring with her practical ones, but Edward put a hand on her shoulder, silencing her. His fingers were trembling slightly, and Margaret saw the shame in her father's eyes, the knowledge that he'd failed, that he'd brought them to this point, that his daughter was offering herself up like a sacrificial lamb to save the family name. Sebastian studied Margaret for a long moment, his gaze sharp and dissecting. She felt like a specimen under glass, every flaw and weakness laid bare. Then he nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin. "Fine. We'll finalize the contract tomorrow morning. My solicitor will—" The door slammed open with enough force to rattle the frame. Everyone turned. Eliza Rowan stood in the doorway breathing hard, her dark hair falling out of its pins in wild tangles around her face. Her dress, a simple cotton thing that had been mended more times than anyone could count, was streaked with mud and what looked like ash. Her hands were filthy, dirt caked under her nails and smeared across her knuckles. Her boots were caked in muck, leaving dark prints on the floor. And her eyes, those sharp, furious green eyes, were locked on Sebastian Hale like a predator sizing up prey. "What the hell is going on here?" she demanded, her voice rough from running, her chest heaving. Catherine closed her eyes, her worst fears confirmed. "Eliza?" "No." Eliza strode into the room, completely unconcerned with the mud she was tracking across the rug, or the fact that she looked like she'd been wrestling pigs. "I heard what he just said. I heard all of it. I was coming up the drive and the windows were open and I heard every goddamn word." Sebastian didn't move, didn't blink. Just watched her with that same cold, calculating stare, like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. Eliza stopped 3 feet away from him, chin up, shoulders back, looking like she was about to throw a punch or spit in his face, or possibly both. Up close, the Duke was even more imposing, a wall of expensive fabric and barely leashed power, but she didn't back down, didn't flinch. "You think you can just walk in here and buy one of us like a horse at market?" she said, her voice shaking with fury. "That's exactly what I'm doing," Sebastian said evenly, his tone utterly calm, like they were discussing the weather. "Eliza, please," Edward started, his voice desperate. But Eliza cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Shut up, father." She didn't look at him, didn't look at anyone except the Duke standing in front of her like some kind of cold marble statue. "You think we're that desperate? That pathetic?" "Yes," Sebastian said simply. "You are." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Eliza's eyes flashed, bright and dangerous. "And you think that gives you the right to treat us like property? Like things you can just buy and sell and use however you want?" "I think it gives me leverage," Sebastian said, his voice still maddeningly calm. "And I think you're smart enough to understand the difference." For a moment, they just stared at each other. The room held its breath. Margaret felt like she was watching something dangerous unfold, like 2 wolves circling each other, teeth bared, waiting to see who would strike first. Then Eliza laughed, a short, sharp, bitter sound that had no humor in it at all. "You're a bastard." "I'm pragmatic," Sebastian corrected, and something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, something else. Interest, maybe. "And if you had any sense, you'd see that this is the best offer your family is going to get." "Best offer?" Eliza's voice rose, her control slipping. "You're offering to marry whichever one of us is desperate enough to agree. You don't care who we are. You don't care what we want. You don't care if we have dreams or hopes or any kind of life we might have imagined for ourselves. You just need a womb and a title to slap on your heir. That's not an offer. That's an insult." Sebastian's jaw tightened, just slightly, barely visible, but it was there. The first crack in that icy composure. "Then refuse," he said, his voice dropping half an octave. "I am refusing," Eliza shot back. "For all of us." "Eliza—" Margaret stepped forward, her voice urgent, panic rising in her chest. "Stop. This isn't your decision to make." "Like hell it isn't." Eliza whirled on her sister, her eyes blazing. You were about to agree to this. You were about to let him turn you into some broodmare for the sake of the family name. Don't you have any self-respect? Margaret's face went pale, then flushed red. I'm trying to save us. By selling yourself? By doing what needs to be done. Margaret's voice cracked, all her carefully controlled composure shattering. What would you have me do, Eliza? Let the creditors take everything? Let Father lose the estate? Let the tenants get thrown off the land? Let Anne and Beatrice starve in the streets? Is that what you want? I'd have you fight. Eliza's hand shook, her whole body vibrating with fury and something else. Fear, maybe, or grief. I'd have you tell this arrogant son of a bitch that we're not for sale, that we're human beings with dignity and worth, and we don't need his money or his title or his cold-blooded charity. That's a lovely sentiment, Sebastian said, his voice cutting through their argument like a blade. He stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and Eliza, his eyes fixed on her with a new intensity, something sharper, more focused, like he was really seeing her for the first time. But sentiment doesn't pay debts. It doesn't keep roofs over heads or food on tables. Your sister is making a rational choice based on the reality of your situation. You should respect that. Eliza turned on him, and Margaret saw something in her sister's eyes that made her chest tighten. Not fear, not anger, something worse. Pity. Rational? Eliza said quietly, her voice dropping to something almost gentle. You call treating my sister like livestock rational? I call it honest, Sebastian said. I'm not pretending to love her. I'm not lying about my intentions. I'm offering a contract, a transaction. She gets security. I get an heir. No one is being deceived. That's more honesty than most marriages start with. Except yourself, Eliza said softly. Sebastian's eyes narrowed, his whole body going still. Excuse me? You think this is honest? Eliza took a step closer, close enough that Margaret could see the mud on her sister's hem, the smudge of ash on her cheek, the way her hands trembled slightly despite her bravado. You think reducing a human being to a set of terms and conditions is honest? You're lying to yourself, Your Grace. You're pretending that people are interchangeable, that we're all just pieces on a chessboard you can move around to suit your purposes. But we're not. We're flesh and blood. We have dreams, fears, hearts that break when you treat them like commodities. And if you can't see that, if you've convinced yourself that none of that matters, that feeling anything is weakness, then you're not pragmatic. You're just broken. The room went dead silent. Sebastian stared at her, really stared. His face was still that mask of cold composure, but something shifted behind his eyes. Something that might have been recognition, or surprise, or anger. Margaret couldn't tell. Anne had stopped breathing. Beatrice was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. Catherine looked like she might faint. Edward had gone gray, his hand gripping the mantelpiece like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Then, slowly, impossibly, the corner of Sebastian's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something close. Something that made him look almost human for half a second before the mask slid back into place. You're brave, he said softly, his voice low enough that Margaret had to strain to hear it. Or stupid. I haven't decided which. Does it matter? Eliza shot back, her chin still up, defiant. Not particularly. He glanced at Edward, then back at Eliza. His gaze lingered on her face, the mud on her cheek, the wild hair, the fierce green eyes that refused to back down. What's your name? Eliza Rowan. And you're the youngest? Yes? Sebastian nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Something was turning over in his mind. Margaret could see it, some calculation being made. Then he looked at Margaret, and his face was completely neutral again. The offer is withdrawn. Margaret's eyes widened, her heart lurching. What? I'm not marrying you, Sebastian said bluntly, like he was informing her of a change in dinner plans. He turned back to Eliza. I'm marrying her. The room exploded. Absolutely not! Catherine surged to her feet, her face flushed, her hands shaking. She's 20 years old. She's wild, uncontrollable. She has no sense of propriety. Perfect, Sebastian interrupted, his voice cutting through Catherine's tirade like a knife through butter. She's intelligent, strong-willed, and unlike the rest of you, she's not afraid to tell me the truth. That's worth more than propriety. Eliza stared at him like he'd just announced he was the King of France. I just told you I'm not for sale. You're not, Sebastian agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. That's why I'm choosing you. That doesn't make any sense. It makes perfect sense. Sebastian's gaze didn't waver, pinning her in place. I don't want a wife who'll nod and agree to everything I say. I don't want someone who'll smile and pretend and lie through her teeth for the sake of keeping the peace. I don't want someone who'll pretend to love me for the title or the money or the security. I want someone who'll challenge me, push back, keep me honest, call me on my bullshit. He paused, and something almost like amusement flickered across his face. You already do. Eliza's heart pounded in her chest so hard she could feel it in her throat. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried to find words and came up empty. Her mind was racing, spinning, trying to make sense of what was happening. This is insane, she finally managed, her voice hoarse. This is practical, Sebastian corrected. And before you refuse, let me make you a different offer, not the one I gave your sister. I don't want your offer. Hear it anyway. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of bergamot and something else. Leather, maybe, or smoke. His voice dropped, low and steady, meant only for her ears. Marry me. Not for love, not for appearances, for honesty. I won't lie to you. I won't pretend to feel things I don't. I won't make promises I can't keep. And in return, you'll have freedom. Real freedom. You want to help the poor? Do it. You want to fix broken things? Do it. You want to spend your days covered in mud and ash helping people who can't help themselves? Do it. I won't cage you. I won't control you. I won't tell you how to dress, or who to talk to, or what you're allowed to care about. I'll give you everything you need to live the life you want, money, resources, protection, as long as you give me an heir. One son, that's all I ask. Eliza's throat tightened, her eyes burning. That's still a transaction. Yes, Sebastian said simply, but it's an honest one. And it's better than what your family has now. Better than watching your sisters marry men who might not let them have any freedom at all. Better than watching your father drink himself to death because he couldn't save the family legacy. Better than watching your tenants lose their homes because the estate goes under. She hated that he was right, hated it with every fiber of her being, hated that he'd taken her own arguments and turned them against her, hated that he'd seen exactly where to push to make her waver. I need to think, she said hoarsely, the words scraping out of her throat like broken glass. You have until tomorrow morning. Sebastian stepped back, putting distance between them. And just like that, the mask was back. The cold Duke. All business. He nodded to Edward, his expression neutral. I'll return at 9 o'clock. If she agrees, we'll finalize the contract. My solicitor will draw up the papers tonight. If not, he shrugged, a casual gesture that somehow managed to convey both indifference and threat. Good luck with the creditors. He turned and walked toward the door, his footsteps measured and precise. At the threshold he paused, looking back over his shoulder. His eyes found Eliza's one more time. Think carefully, Miss Rowan, he said quietly. This isn't just about you. And then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hall and out into the cold evening air. The sound of his carriage wheels on gravel filtered through the windows, growing fainter and fainter until there was nothing but silence. The moment the sound faded completely, the room erupted. Eliza, what have you done? Catherine's voice was shrill, panicked, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. You've ruined everything. I didn't do anything, Eliza shot back, her voice raw. He's the one who... You provoked him. Margaret's voice shook, and when Eliza turned to look at her sister, she saw something that made her stomach drop. Hurt. Deep, wounded hurt. You insulted him, challenged him in front of everyone, and now he wants you instead of me. Do you have any idea what you've done? I was trying to defend you. I didn't ask you to defend me. Margaret's composure cracked completely, tears spilling down her cheeks. I was handling it. I was doing what needed to be done. And you couldn't just let it happen, could you? You had to make a scene, had to play the hero, and now... She broke off, her hand pressed to her mouth, shoulders shaking. Anne moved to her side, wrapping an arm around her, glaring at Eliza with accusation in her eyes. Beatrice just cried, soft hiccuping sobs that made Eliza's chest ache. Margaret, I'm sorry. Eliza said, her voice cracking. I didn't mean, it doesn't matter what you meant. Edward's voice was flat, exhausted. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. What matters is what happens now. He looked at Eliza, and she saw the weight of the world in his eyes. He gave you until tomorrow morning. You need to decide. Decide what? Eliza's voice rose. Whether to sell myself to a man who thinks people are just things to be bought? Decide whether you're going to save your family, Edward said quietly, or let us all drown because you're too proud to compromise. The words hit like a physical blow. Eliza stared at her father, her heart breaking. That's not fair, she whispered. None of this is fair, Edward said. But it's the hand we've been dealt, and you're the only one who can play it now. Catherine stood, her face pale and drawn. I need to lie down, she said faintly, and left the room without another word. Anne and Beatrice followed her, Anne supporting Margaret, who looked like she might collapse. And then it was just Eliza and her father, standing in the ruins of their family's last hope. What do I do? Eliza asked, her voice small. She hated how young she sounded, how lost. Edward walked to the window looking out at the grounds, the gardens that needed tending, the walls that needed repair, the land that had been in their family for generations and was slipping through their fingers like water. I can't tell you that, he said finally. This has to be your choice. But Eliza, think about more than just yourself. Think about the tenants, the village families, the people who depend on this estate. If we go under, they go under too. Eliza closed her eyes, her throat tight. She thought about Mrs. Harrow, the widow with 3 children and a leaking roof. About Tommy, the blacksmith's son who'd lost his leg in an accident and couldn't work anymore. About all the people she'd been trying to help, one small act at a time, knowing it wasn't enough but doing it anyway because what else could she do? If the estate collapsed, they'd have nothing, no one to turn to, nowhere to go. He said I'd have freedom, she said quietly, that I could keep helping people, that he wouldn't stop me. Do you believe him? Eliza opened her eyes, staring at the empty grate where a fire should have been burning but couldn't because coal was expensive. I don't know, she admitted. But what choice do I have? Edward didn't answer. There was no answer to give. Eliza walked out of the parlor, her boots still muddy, her hands still dirty, her heart pounding with 100 fears and no answers. She climbed the stairs to her small bedroom at the back of the house, the room that had been hers since childhood, with its faded wallpaper and creaking floorboards and window that looked out over the garden. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed and put her head in her hands. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. That's all the time she had to decide the rest of her life. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the dying estate. The sky was streaked with red and gold, beautiful and terrible, like the world was burning. And somewhere in the distance, Sebastian Hale's carriage rolled away into the gathering dark, carrying the man who'd just turned her entire world upside down with a few cold, calculated words and an offer she couldn't refuse, even though every fiber of her being wanted to. She looked down at her hands, still dirty, still stained with the earth she'd been digging in, trying to plant something that might grow in soil that was slowly dying. One son, she whispered to the empty room. That's all he wants. One son, and then I'm free. But was anyone ever really free when they'd sold themselves to survive? She didn't know. And tomorrow morning she'd have to decide anyway. She didn't sleep. How could she? Every time Eliza closed her eyes, she saw Sebastian Hale's cold gray stare, heard his voice offering her freedom like it was something he could package and sell. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, watching shadows shift as the moon crawled across the sky. The house creaked and settled around her, each groan of old wood sounding like an accusation. By the time dawn crept through her window, she'd made her decision. Not because she wanted to, because there was no other choice that didn't end in ruin for everyone she loved. She rose, washed her face in the cold water from the basin, and dressed in her least damaged gown, a dark blue thing that had been her mother's once, taken in and mended until it fit Eliza's slimmer frame. Her hands shook as she fastened the buttons. She didn't bother with her hair beyond pulling it back in a simple knot. If she was going to sell herself, she'd at least do it looking like herself, not some painted doll. The house was silent when she came downstairs. Too early for the others. Good. She didn't think she could face Margaret's wounded eyes, or her mother's tight-lipped disapproval, or her father's relief. She walked to the parlor and sat in the chair by the window, watching the drive, waiting. At precisely 9 o'clock, Sebastian's carriage appeared. Eliza's stomach twisted, but she stood, straightened her shoulders, and walked to the entrance hall. Jameson was already there, his old face carefully neutral as he reached for the door. "Miss Eliza?" he said quietly. "Are you certain?" She looked at him. This man who'd been with her family since before she was born, who taught her to play chess when she was 7, who'd never once judged her for coming home covered in mud. "No," she said honestly, "but I'm doing it anyway." He nodded slowly, something like respect flickering in his eyes, and opened the door. Sebastian stood on the threshold, dressed in black again, his face unreadable. He looked at her for a long moment, taking in her simple dress, her plain hair, the stubborn set of her jaw. "Miss Rowan," he said. "Your Grace," she replied, her voice steady. "Have you made your decision?" "Yes." He waited. Didn't prompt her, just stood there, patient as stone. Eliza took a breath. "I'll marry you, on one condition." Something flickered in his eyes. "I don't negotiate after an offer is made." "Then you don't get a wife," Eliza said flatly. "Because I'm not Margaret. I won't just agree and hope for the best. If I'm doing this, I need proof." "Proof of what?" "That you meant what you said. About freedom. About honesty." She stepped closer, close enough to see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. "You said I could help people, that you wouldn't stop me." "Prove it." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "How?" "Take me with you. Today. Show me your world. The estates, the tenants, the people who depend on you. Let me see how you actually treat the people under your care, not how you say you treat them, how you actually do." She met his gaze, unflinching. "If I see cruelty or neglect, or any sign that you're the kind of man who sees people as tools, I walk away. Contract or no contract. But if you're telling the truth, if you actually honor your word, then I'll sign whatever papers your solicitor drew up." For a long moment, Sebastian just stared at her. Then, impossibly, he smiled. Not the cold twist of lips from yesterday, but something real. Small, but real. "You're either very brave or very foolish," he said. "You said that yesterday. Have you decided which yet?" "No." He turned toward the door. "But I'm beginning to think it might be both. My carriage is waiting." "Now?" "You wanted proof. I'm giving it to you." He glanced back at her. "Unless you'd prefer to wait and let your family weigh in on this decision, I'm sure your mother has opinions." Eliza grabbed her cloak from the hook by the door. "Let's go." She saw Jameson's eyes widen slightly, but he said nothing. Just held the door as she followed Sebastian out into the cold morning air. The carriage was sleek and expensive, all polished wood and brass fittings. A driver sat up top, his face carefully blank. Sebastian handed her in without ceremony, then climbed in after her, settling onto the opposite seat. The door closed, the carriage lurched into motion, and just like that, Eliza Rowan left her childhood home with a man she barely knew, gambling everything on a promise that might be a lie. "Where are we going?" she asked as the estate disappeared behind them. "Greystone Manor, my primary residence, 2 hours north." Sebastian leaned back, watching her with that unnerving intensity. "You'll meet my steward, my housekeeper, and some of the tenants. You can ask them whatever you want. I won't interfere." "You're very confident they'll speak well of you." "I'm confident they'll speak honestly," Sebastian corrected. "Whether that's well or poorly remains to be seen." Eliza studied him. In the close confines of the carriage, he seemed even larger, more imposing. His shoulders nearly touched both sides of the bench. His legs were too long for the space, one knee almost brushing hers. But he didn't crowd her, didn't leer or make crude comments, or any of the things she'd half expected from a man who'd offered to buy a wife like livestock. He just sat there, watching her with those cold gray eyes, waiting. "Why me?" she asked finally. "You could have had Margaret. She's beautiful, accomplished, everything a duchess should be. I'm none of those things." "You're wrong," Sebastian said. "You're exactly what a duchess should be. I don't know which fork to use at dinner." "Neither do half the peers in Parliament. They just pretend better. He shifted slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. Margaret would have been a good wife, dutiful, proper. She would have smiled and nodded and never told me when I was being a bastard. Within 5 years, she'd have hated me, and I'd have hated her right back, and we'd have lived in the same house like polite strangers for the rest of our lives. He paused. You won't do that. You don't know what I'll do. Yes, I do. He leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees. You'll fight. You'll push back. You'll make my life difficult in ways I can't even imagine yet. But you'll never lie to me. And that's worth more than 1,000 proper curtsies. Eliza's throat tightened. You can't possibly know that. I know you walked into a room full of people and called a duke a bastard to his face because you thought I was treating your sister poorly, Sebastian said. I know you spend your days helping people who can't help themselves, even though your own family is falling apart. I know you'd rather starve than compromise your principles. His voice dropped. Those aren't things you fake, Miss Rowan. That's who you are. She didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to feel about the fact that this cold, calculating man had seen her more clearly in one evening than most people who'd known her all her life. I still don't trust you, she said quietly. Good, Sebastian said. You shouldn't. Not yet. Trust has to be earned. That's why we're doing this. The carriage rolled on, carrying them north through countryside that grew wilder and more rugged with each passing mile. Eliza watched through the window as manicured estates gave way to rougher land. Stone walls, steep hills, patches of forest that looked like they'd never seen an axe. It's beautiful, she said half to herself. It's harsh, Sebastian corrected. The land here doesn't forgive mistakes. The winters are brutal, the soil is thin, the people who survive here are the ones who work harder than anyone else and don't expect the world to be fair. Sounds familiar, Eliza muttered. Sebastian's mouth twitched. I thought it might. By the time the carriage turned onto a long drive lined with ancient oak trees, Eliza's nerves were strung tight as wire. The house that appeared at the end of the drive made her breath catch. Greystone Manor wasn't beautiful in the delicate, refined way that estates closer to London were beautiful. It was massive and imposing, all dark stone and sharp angles, built to withstand sieges and storms. It looked like a fortress, like something out of another age, when power was measured in walls thick enough to stop armies. It's not very welcoming, Sebastian said, following her gaze. No, Eliza agreed. But it's honest. It doesn't pretend to be something it's not. He looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. Softened, just slightly. No, it doesn't. The carriage stopped. A footman opened the door, and Sebastian climbed out first, then turned to help her down. His hand was warm through her glove, steady and strong. The entrance hall was as imposing as the exterior. High ceilings, dark wood, portraits of grim-faced ancestors staring down from the walls. But it was clean, well-maintained, and unlike the Rowan estate, it didn't smell of rot or desperation. A woman appeared from a side corridor, moving with the brisk efficiency of someone who ran a household like a general ran an army. She was in her 50s, gray-haired, with sharp eyes and a face that suggested she didn't suffer fools. Your Grace, she said, curtsying briefly. Then her gaze moved to Eliza, and those sharp eyes narrowed slightly. And this is? Miss Eliza Rowan, Sebastian said. My future wife, if she agrees to the arrangement. Miss Rowan, this is Mrs. Thornton, my housekeeper. Mrs. Thornton's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. Future wife. Conditional on her approval of how I run the estate, Sebastian said calmly. She's requested proof that I treat my people fairly. I'm providing it. You're to answer any question she has, honestly and completely. I won't be present for the conversation. Mrs. Thornton looked at Eliza with new interest. Is that so? Yes, Eliza said, finding her voice. I need to know what kind of man he is when no one's watching. For a moment, Mrs. Thornton just stared at her. Then slowly she smiled. It transformed her whole face, made her look 10 years younger. Well, that's a first. Come with me, Miss Rowan. We'll have tea and a proper talk. Sebastian nodded once and disappeared down a corridor, leaving Eliza alone with the housekeeper. Mrs. Thornton led her through a maze of hallways to a small, comfortable sitting room that clearly belonged to the staff. Worn furniture, a fire crackling in the grate, the smell of bread baking somewhere nearby. Sit, Mrs. Thornton said, not unkindly. I'll fetch the tea. She returned a few minutes later with a tray, poured 2 cups, and settled into the chair across from Eliza with the air of a woman preparing for battle. Ask your questions, she said. Eliza wrapped her hands around the warm cup, gathering her thoughts. How long have you worked for him? 15 years, since before he inherited the title. What's he like? As an employer? Mrs. Thornton took a sip of tea, considering. Fair. Demanding, but fair. He expects competence and doesn't tolerate laziness or dishonesty. But he pays well, better than most estates. The staff quarters are warm and dry. We eat properly, and when someone's sick or has family trouble, he doesn't dock their wages or throw them out. She paused. He's not warm. He doesn't smile much or make small talk. But he's decent. He keeps his word. And he doesn't treat us like we're invisible. Does he ever lose his temper? Rarely. I've seen him angry exactly twice in 15 years. Once when a steward was caught skimming money from the tenants. Once when a groom was beating a horse. Mrs. Thornton's eyes hardened. Both men were dismissed immediately. The steward was reported to the magistrate. The groom was lucky his grace didn't break his arm before throwing him off the property. Eliza's grip tightened on her cup. He protects the vulnerable. In his own way, yes. Mrs. Thornton studied her. You care about that, about how he treats people who can't fight back. I care about whether he's going to turn me into one of them, Eliza said bluntly. Mrs. Thornton's smile returned, sharp and approving. You've got spine. Good. You'll need it. She leaned forward. I'll tell you something, Miss Rowan. The Duke is a hard man, cold, some would say. He doesn't love easily, if at all. But he's not cruel. He doesn't lie. And once he makes a promise, he keeps it, even when it costs him. She paused. If he told you he'd give you freedom, he meant it. But he'll also expect you to keep your end of whatever bargain you made. One son, Eliza said quietly. That's all he asked for. Mrs. Thornton nodded slowly. Then that's all he'll ask for. And after that, you'll be free to live however you choose. She hesitated. Can I ask you something? Yes. Why are you doing this? Really? Eliza looked into her tea, seeing her own reflection rippling on the surface. Because my family is drowning, and he's the only one who offered to pull us out. Because the people on our estate, the tenants, the villagers, they'll suffer if we go under. And because... She trailed off, surprised by the words forming in her mind. Because I think he's telling the truth, and that scares me more than if he were lying. Mrs. Thornton reached across and patted her hand. You'll do fine, girl. Better than fine, I think. Over the next 3 hours, Eliza met the steward, a sharp-eyed man named Garrett, who showed her the estate ledgers without prompting, pointing out exactly how much Sebastian invested in maintaining tenant cottages, repairing roads, and supporting families through bad harvests. She met the head groom, who spoke with grudging respect about a duke who actually knew how to handle horses and didn't tolerate abuse. She met a tenant farmer and his wife, who told her about the time Sebastian had personally helped rebuild their barn after a storm, working alongside the hired men without complaint. Every conversation painted the same picture, a man who was cold and distant but fundamentally fair, who kept his promises, who didn't waste words on sentiment but backed up what he said with action. By the time Sebastian reappeared, finding her in the estate office with Garrett, Eliza's head was spinning. Well? He asked, his expression unreadable. Eliza looked at Garrett, who nodded slightly and left them alone. They spoke well of you, she said. Did you believe them? I don't know yet. She stood facing him across the desk. I need to see more. What more? The orphanage. Sebastian blinked. What orphanage? The one in the village near here. Mrs. Thornton mentioned it. She said you donate to it but never visit. Eliza crossed her arms. If you want me to believe you care about vulnerable people, show me. Take me there. Now. For the first time, Sebastian looked uncertain. That's not... I don't think... Why not? Eliza pressed. What are you afraid I'll see? His jaw worked. I'm not afraid. I just don't see the point in parading my charity like some kind of performance. Then don't parade it. Just take me there. Let me see how they're actually living with your money. She stepped closer. Unless the reality doesn't match what you've been telling me. Sebastian's eyes narrowed. Then he turned on his heel. Fine. Get your cloak. 20 minutes later, they were in the carriage again, rolling toward a small village nestled in the shadow of steep hills. The orphanage was a squat stone building at the edge of town, smoke rising from its chimney. A handful of children played in the muddy yard, their clothes patched but clean. Sebastian climbed out, then hesitated, looking at the building like it might bite him. Your Grace! A woman emerged from the front door, middle-aged, round-faced, with flour on her apron and warmth in her eyes. We weren't expecting you. Mrs. Cole, Sebastian said stiffly. This is Miss Rowan. She wanted to see the orphanage. Mrs. Cole's eyes lit up. Of course. Come in, come in. Inside, the orphanage was simple but well kept. The floors were clean. The children looked healthy, if thin. The rooms were cold but not freezing. His Grace has been very generous, Mrs. Cole said, leading them through. We were on the brink of closing 2 years ago. Not enough food, holes in the roof, barely enough coal to keep the children from freezing. Then he showed up one day, didn't announce himself, just walked in and asked what we needed. She smiled at Sebastian, who looked profoundly uncomfortable. He fixed the roof himself, hired men to repair the floors, set up a monthly stipend for food and coal, and medicine. These children would be on the streets without him. One of the children, a girl of maybe 7 with tangled dark hair, ran up to Sebastian and wrapped her arms around his leg. Your Grace, she said, grinning up at him. Did you bring sweets? Sebastian looked down at her, and Eliza watched something crack in his expression. Not much, just a flicker, but enough. Not today, Emma, he said quietly. Then, after a pause, he reached down and awkwardly patted her head. Eliza's throat tightened. They stayed for an hour. Eliza helped Mrs. Cole in the kitchen while Sebastian stood in the corner looking like he desperately wanted to escape. The children swarmed around him anyway, chattering and laughing and completely unafraid, like they'd done this before. When they finally left, climbing back into the carriage as the sun started to set, Eliza couldn't hold it in anymore. Why didn't you tell me about that? She demanded. Sebastian looked at her, his face carefully neutral again. Tell you what? That you actually care. That you're not just... She waved a hand, frustrated. You act like you're made of ice, but you fix that roof yourself. You play with those children. They love you. They don't love me, Sebastian said flatly. They love that I give them food and keep them warm. There's a difference. Is there? Eliza shot back. Because from where I was standing, that little girl hugged you like you were family. Sebastian looked away, jaw tight. I do what needs to be done. That's all. That's not all, Eliza said softly. And you know it. He didn't answer, just sat there, staring out the window as the landscape rolled past, his face a mask, but his hands were clenched into fists on his knees. Eliza took a breath. I'll marry you. Sebastian's head snapped toward her. What? I'll marry you, she repeated, her voice steady. You kept your word. You showed me what I needed to see. You're not cruel. You're not a liar. You're just broken in a different way than I expected. She met his eyes. So yes, I'll sign your contract. I'll give you your heir. And then I'll spend the rest of my life trying to figure out what the hell happened to you that made you so determined to pretend you don't have a heart. Sebastian stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he leaned back, something almost like relief flickering across his face. You'll regret this, he said quietly. Probably, Eliza agreed, but I'm doing it anyway. They rode in silence for a while. Then Sebastian spoke again, his voice low. There are things you should know, about me, about why I'm the way I am. I'm listening. He was quiet for so long she thought he'd changed his mind. Then, my father was a bastard. Not in the literal sense, he was legitimate, inherited the title properly, but he was cruel. To my mother, to the staff, to me. Sebastian's voice was flat, emotionless, like he was reciting facts. He believed affection was weakness, that love made you vulnerable. So he beat it out of me, literally. Eliza's breath caught. By the time I was 10, I'd learned not to cry, not to show fear, not to show anything. Sebastian looked at her, and his eyes were empty. He died when I was 17. I inherited, and I swore I'd never be like him. But I also swore I'd never be weak enough to let anyone hurt me the way he hurt my mother. So you locked yourself away, Eliza said softly. So I stayed safe, Sebastian corrected. And it's worked. For 15 years, it's worked. Until now. Until now, he agreed, and something like dark humor flickered in his eyes. You're going to ruin me, aren't you? Only if you're lucky, Eliza said. He laughed, a short, sharp bark of sound that startled them both. The carriage rolled on through the gathering dark, and somewhere between the orphanage and Greystone Manor, between his broken confession and her reckless acceptance, something shifted. Not love, not yet, but the fragile, dangerous beginning of trust. When they arrived back at the Rowan estate just after nightfall, Sebastian helped her down from the carriage. His hand lingered on hers for just a moment longer than necessary. My solicitor will come tomorrow with the papers, he said. I'll be ready. Eliza. He said her name like he was testing it. I meant what I said, about freedom, about honesty. I'll keep my word. I know, she said. And the terrifying thing was, she did. She watched his carriage disappear down the drive, then turned to face her family home. Lights glowed in the windows. Inside, her family was waiting. Margaret's hurt, her mother's judgment, her father's relief. She squared her shoulders and walked inside. The price was paid. The bargain was struck. Now she just had to survive it. Margaret was waiting in the entrance hall, her face pale in the lamplight. She didn't say anything as Eliza came through the door, just stared with eyes that held too many things. Hurt, betrayal, resignation, and something that might have been envy. It's done then, Margaret said finally, her voice flat. Yes. You're really going to marry him? Yes. Eliza stripped off her gloves, her fingers stiff from the cold. The solicitor comes tomorrow with the papers. And you're satisfied? With your grand inspection of his character? There was an edge to Margaret's voice now, sharp as broken glass. Did he pass your test? Eliza met her sister's eyes. He did. Margaret laughed, a bitter sound. Of course he did. Because Eliza Rowan always knows best, doesn't she? Always has to be the hero, even when no one asked her to be. Margaret. No. Margaret's voice cracked. You don't get to explain this away. You don't get to make this noble. You stole my chance at saving this family because you couldn't keep your mouth shut for 5 minutes. And now you're marrying a duke, and I'm nothing, just the eldest daughter who wasn't good enough. The words hit like physical blows. Eliza opened her mouth, but nothing came out. What could she say? That Margaret was wrong? She wasn't, not entirely. I'm sorry, Eliza whispered. I never meant, it doesn't matter what you meant. Margaret's composure was crumbling, tears tracking down her cheeks. What matters is what happened. You're getting everything, and I'm getting nothing, and we both have to live with that now. She turned and walked up the stairs, her steps heavy, leaving Eliza standing alone in the cold hall. The wedding came faster than Eliza had expected. 2 weeks of frantic preparation, of fittings for a dress she didn't want, of her mother's tight-lipped instructions on how to behave as a duchess, of Anne and Beatrice tiptoeing around her like she was made of glass. Margaret barely spoke to her. Her father drank more. The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Sebastian came twice during those 2 weeks. Once to finalize the contract, his solicitor reading through terms in a monotone while Eliza signed her name and felt like she was signing away pieces of herself. Once to discuss the wedding itself, which he wanted small and quick, no fanfare. She'd agreed readily. The last thing she wanted was a spectacle. Are you afraid? He'd asked her during that second visit, catching her alone in the library. Terrified, she'd admitted. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. He'd looked at her with those cold gray eyes, and for a moment something almost like concern flickered there. If you want to back out, now is the time. Do you want me to back out? No. The word came quick, certain. But I won't trap you if you've changed your mind. She hadn't changed her mind. She was too deep now, and besides, her family's debts had already been cleared. Sebastian had paid them the day after she'd agreed, not waiting for the wedding, just quietly settling every creditor and restoring the estate's accounts to solvency. When her father had tried to thank him, Sebastian had just shrugged and said, "A deal is a deal." The wedding took place in the small chapel on the Rowan estate, with only family present and a vicar who looked deeply uncomfortable performing a ceremony that felt more like a business transaction than a sacrament. Eliza wore the blue dress she'd worn the day Sebastian proposed. Her mother had nearly fainted at the impropriety, but Eliza had refused to budge. If she was selling herself, she'd do it on her terms. Sebastian stood at the altar in black, his face expressionless as she walked down the aisle. No smile, no warmth, just that steady, unblinking gaze that made her feel like he was seeing straight through her. The vows were brief. His voice was steady, hers shook only slightly. When the vicar said, "You may kiss the bride," Sebastian leaned in and pressed a chaste kiss to her forehead, not her lips, like he was sealing a contract, not a marriage. And then it was done. She was the Duchess of Greystone, and she'd never felt more alone in her life. They left immediately after, Sebastian's carriage waiting to take them to Greystone Manor. No wedding breakfast, no celebration, just a quiet departure while her family stood on the steps, watching her go. Eliza looked back once and saw Margaret standing at her window, her face in shadow, and wondered if her sister would ever forgive her. The first week of marriage was strange and awkward and nothing like Eliza had expected. Sebastian gave her a suite of rooms in the East Wing, bedroom, sitting room, private study, and told her she could do whatever she wanted with them. He took his meals in his study most days, working through correspondence and estate business. They saw each other at dinner, exchanged polite conversation about nothing important, and then retreated to their separate spaces. He didn't touch her, didn't demand anything, just left her alone. It should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like living with a ghost. "Give it time," Mrs. Thornton said when Eliza finally broke down and asked if this was normal. "His Grace doesn't trust easily, neither do you. You're both circling each other like dogs in a pit, waiting to see who bites first." "I don't want to bite," Eliza said. "Then stop waiting for him to." Mrs. Thornton handed her a cup of tea. "You want things to change? Change them. You're the Duchess now. Act like it." So Eliza started spending her days the way she'd always wanted to, visiting the tenants, helping repair cottages, working in the village with families who needed an extra pair of hands. Sebastian never stopped her, never even commented on the fact that she came home covered in mud most evenings. He just looked at her across the dinner table, something unreadable in his eyes, and asked how her day had been. And slowly, carefully, they started to talk. Not about anything important at first, just small things, books they'd read, places they'd been. Eliza told him about the widow who needed help with her garden. Sebastian told her about a new irrigation system he was considering for the South Fields. It was mundane and careful, and felt like two people learning a new language, one hesitant word at a time. Then, 6 weeks into their marriage, everything went to hell. It started with a letter. Eliza found it on the breakfast table, addressed to Sebastian in handwriting she didn't recognize. She wouldn't have thought anything of it. Sebastian received dozens of letters a day, except for the way his face went white when he read it. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer, just stood abruptly, the chair scraping across the floor, and strode out of the room without a word. Eliza stared after him, her stomach knotting. She'd never seen him rattled before, never seen him lose that iron control. She found Mrs. Thornton in the kitchen and asked if she knew what was going on. "Trouble," the housekeeper said grimly. "Lord Wickham's in town." "Who's Lord Wickham?" Mrs. Thornton's mouth thinned. "The Duke's cousin, second in line to the title. A snake in expensive clothes." She looked at Eliza, and there was warning in her eyes. "Stay away from him, Your Grace. He's poison." But staying away from Edmund Wickham turned out to be impossible, because he showed up at Greystone Manor that very afternoon, all charm and smooth smiles and eyes like a shark. He was handsome in a way that made Eliza's skin crawl. Golden hair, easy grin, the kind of practiced charisma that felt rehearsed. He swept into the drawing room where she was reading like he owned the place, kissed her hand with 2 moist lips, and declared himself delighted to meet his cousin's unexpected bride. "I was surprised to hear Sebastian had married," Wickham said, settling into a chair without being invited. "He always swore he'd stay a bachelor, said love was for fools." He smiled at her, and it didn't reach his eyes. "Yet here you are. How did you manage it?" "I didn't manage anything," Eliza said coldly. "We have an arrangement." "Ah, yes. The arrangement." Wickham's smile widened. "I heard about that. Very practical." Bury Sebastian. Though I must say, the rumors flying about how quickly it all happened are quite salacious. Eliza's stomach dropped. What rumors? Oh, you know how society talks. Questions about why a duke would suddenly marry some country nobody with no dowry, no connections, no particular beauty or accomplishment. He said it casually, like commenting on the weather. Some are saying you must have trapped him somehow. Others suggest perhaps you were already carrying his child and he married you to avoid scandal. Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. That's a lie. Of course it is, Wickham said smoothly. I'm sure you're the very picture of virtue. But you know how these things spread. Once the tongue gets hold of a story, truth doesn't really matter anymore. What do you want? Eliza asked, her voice shaking with fury. Want? I want nothing. I'm simply here to offer my congratulations and warn you. He leaned forward, his smile fading. Sebastian has enemies, powerful ones, people who don't like how much influence he has, how much money. I'm trying to protect him by making sure his new wife understands what she's walked into. By spreading lies about me? I haven't spread anything, Wickham said, his eyes cold now. I'm just telling you what I've heard, what everyone in London is saying. If you want to stop it, you'll need to appear in society. Prove you're respectable. Prove this marriage is legitimate. He stood, straightening his cuffs. Or you can hide up here in the north and let the rumors destroy both your reputations. Your choice. He left, and Eliza sat frozen in her chair, her mind racing. When Sebastian came home an hour later, she confronted him immediately. Is it true? Are there rumors about us in London? His jaw tightened. Yes. How bad? Bad enough. He stripped off his coat, his movements jerky. Wickham's been spreading them, suggesting you're a fortune hunter, that you manipulated me into marriage, that you're pregnant with another man's child, and I married you to avoid scandal for your family. Eliza felt like she'd been punched. Why would he do that? Because if he can destroy your reputation, our marriage becomes questionable. If our marriage is questionable, any heir we have becomes questionable. And if there's doubt about the heir, Sebastian's voice was flat, but fury burned in his eyes. He's second in line. If he can create enough scandal, enough doubt, he might be able to challenge for the title when I die. That's insane. That's aristocracy. Sebastian turned to face her, and she saw exhaustion in the lines of his face. I'm sorry. I should have anticipated this. Should have protected you better. How do we stop it? We don't. He said it quietly, like a death sentence. Wickham has connections. Money. He can make these rumors stick, and once they take hold in society, there's no killing them. The best we can do is ignore it and hope it dies down eventually. That's not good enough, Eliza said. It's all we have. No. Eliza stood, her mind working frantically. We go to London. We face society directly. We prove the rumors are lies. Sebastian shook his head. You don't understand what you're suggesting. London society will eat you alive. They'll tear you apart for sport. You're nobody by their standards. No title, no family name worth mentioning, no training in how to navigate those waters. If we go there, they'll destroy you. Let them try, Eliza said, her voice hard. I didn't survive my family falling apart and marry a man I barely knew just to let your snake of a cousin ruin everything without a fight. Eliza, I'm going, she said firmly, with or without you. If you want to hide up here and let Wickham win, fine, but I won't. Sebastian stared at her, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. You're insane. Probably. She crossed her arms. Are you coming or not? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. We leave tomorrow. London was everything Eliza had feared and worse. The city was massive and filthy and overwhelming, all narrow streets and crushing crowds and air thick with coal smoke. The townhouse Sebastian owned in Mayfair was elegant and cold, all marble and gilt and rooms that echoed, and society was a battlefield. Within 2 days of their arrival, the invitations started pouring in. People who wanted to inspect Sebastian's new bride, to see if the rumors were true, to watch her fail. Every card was a trap, every event a test. You don't have to go, Sebastian said the night before their first ball. We can leave. Go back to Greystone. No. Eliza looked at herself in the mirror. wearing a dress that cost more than her family used to spend in a year, her hair styled by a maid who'd barely hidden her disdain. She looked like a duchess. She felt like a fraud. "We finished this." The ball was a nightmare from the moment they walked in. Conversations stopped. People stared. Whispers followed them like a wake. Eliza felt like an animal at the zoo, put on display for the amusement of predators. "Smile," Sebastian murmured, his hand at her back. "Don't let them see you're afraid." So she smiled. And when Lady Hartwell, a vicious old woman who ruled society gossip like a tyrant, made a pointed comment about how surprising it was that the Duke had married so precipitously, Eliza smiled wider and said, "I suppose when you find what you're looking for, there's no point in waiting." The old woman's eyes narrowed. "And what, pray tell, were you looking for?" "A man who keeps his word," Eliza said clearly. "Apparently that's rarer than I thought." It was a gamble, challenging Lady Hartwell directly. But the woman blinked, surprised, and something that might have been respect flickered across her face before she moved on. "Well done," Sebastian said quietly. "You didn't back down." "Neither did you, when I called you a bastard." Eliza took a glass of champagne from a passing servant, her hands shaking slightly. "I figured I'd try your approach. Brutal honesty." For 3 weeks they fought. Every ball, every dinner, every social event was a battle. Eliza stumbled constantly, used the wrong fork, addressed people incorrectly, committed a dozen tiny social infractions that would have been forgiven in someone born to the aristocracy, but were seized upon as proof of her unworthiness. But she didn't quit, and slowly, painfully, she started to learn, started to fight back, started to earn grudging respect from some quarters. Then Wickham made his move. The scandal sheet appeared on a Thursday morning, distributed across every drawing room in London. Eliza found Sebastian holding a copy, his face carved from stone. "What is it?" she asked. He handed it to her without a word. The headline made her stomach drop. "Duchess of Greystone, Fortune Hunter or Fallen Woman?" The article was vicious. It claimed Eliza had been involved with a local merchant's son before her marriage, that she'd been caught in a compromising position, that Sebastian had been forced to marry her to save her family from complete social ruin. It was lies, all of it lies, but it was written just plausibly enough that people would believe it. And at the bottom, though unsigned, Eliza knew exactly who'd planted the story. "Wickham," she said, her voice shaking. "Yes." Sebastian crumpled the paper. "This is it. This is the kill shot. Once this spreads, and it will spread, your reputation is finished. Our marriage becomes a joke. Everything we've fought for is gone. We can fight back. We can—" "How?" Sebastian's voice cracked. "How do we prove a negative? How do we prove you weren't involved with someone when the accusation is so vague they can't be disproved? Even if we found the merchant's son and got him to deny it, people would just say we paid him off." Eliza stared at the paper, her mind racing. He was right. There was no way to fight this. Not directly. But maybe there was another way. "We get married again," she said suddenly. Sebastian looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "What?" "We get married again, publicly, in London, in front of everyone, with all of society watching." Eliza's heart pounded, the plan forming even as she spoke. "We turn it into an event, a renewal of vows, a celebration. We invite everyone, including Wickham. We make it so public, so visible, that no one can question the legitimacy of our marriage." "That's insane." "It's a gamble," Eliza corrected, "but it's all we have. If we run now, we're admitting the rumors are true. But if we stand up in front of everyone and reaffirm our commitment to each other, if we show them we're not ashamed, not hiding—" She grabbed his hands. "It might work. It's a long shot, but it might work." Sebastian stared at her, something fierce and almost frightened in his eyes. "If it fails, you'll be ruined. Completely. No coming back from it." "Then we'd better make sure it doesn't fail." The ceremony was scheduled for a week later, in a church large enough to hold half of London's society. Invitations went out with a simple message. "The Duke and Duchess of Greystone request the honor of your presence at a celebration of their marriage." The responses were mixed. Some accepted out of curiosity. Some accepted out of malice, wanting to watch the spectacle of their downfall. Some refused, already writing them off as finished. Wickham accepted immediately. The days leading up to the ceremony were torture. Eliza barely slept, running through everything that could go wrong. Sebastian threw himself into preparations with grim determination, securing the church, arranging for security, making sure every detail was perfect. "Are you sure about this?" he asked her the night before, finding her pacing in her rooms. "No," Eliza admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." He crossed to her, and for the first time since their marriage, he reached out and touched her face. His hand was warm, calloused, gentle. "You're the bravest person I've ever met," he said quietly. "And if this fails, if it all falls apart tomorrow, I want you to know that marrying you was the best decision I've ever made." Eliza's breath caught. "Sebastian, I mean it." His thumb brushed her cheek. "I don't know when it happened, but somewhere between you calling me a bastard and now I started to care about you. More than I thought I could care about anyone." Eliza's eyes burned. "That's a terrible time to tell me that, right before we might lose everything." "I know." He smiled, small and sad, "but I needed you to hear it, just in case." He left before she could respond, and Eliza stood alone in her rooms, her heart breaking and rebuilding itself all at once. The next morning, she dressed in white. A real wedding dress this time, beautiful and elegant, everything her first wedding hadn't been. Mrs. Thornton had traveled down from Greystone to help her, and the older woman's steady presence kept Eliza from flying apart. "You can do this," Mrs. Thornton said, adjusting the veil. "You've survived everything else. You'll survive this too." The church was packed when Eliza arrived, every pew filled with aristocrats in their finest, all watching with predatory interest. She could feel their judgment like a weight pressing down on her shoulders. And there, in the third row, sat Edmund Wickham, his smile sharp as a knife. Sebastian stood at the altar, his face pale but steady. When Eliza started down the aisle, his eyes locked on hers, and she saw fear there. Real fear. Not for himself, for her. She reached him, took his hands. They felt like ice. The vicar began the ceremony, his voice echoing in the vast space. Eliza barely heard the words. She was too focused on Sebastian's face, on the way his jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth. Then came the vows. Sebastian spoke first, his voice low and steady. "I, Sebastian Hale, take you, Eliza Rowan, to be my wife, not out of duty or obligation, but by choice. You challenged me when no one else dared. You saw through my walls and called me on every lie I told myself. You made me want to be better than I am." His voice cracked slightly. "I don't deserve you, but I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to." The church was dead silent. Eliza's turn. She'd prepared words, practiced them, but standing there, looking into his eyes, she forgot every rehearsed line. "I, Eliza Rowan, take you, Sebastian Hale, to be my husband. You're cold and difficult and you drive me insane." A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd, but she kept going. "But you're also honest and brave and kinder than you want anyone to know. You kept every promise you made to me. You gave me freedom when you could have caged me, and somewhere along the way you made me fall in." The church door slammed open. Everyone turned. A man stood in the doorway, mud-splattered and breathless. A messenger. "Stop the ceremony," he shouted. "I have urgent news for the Duke." Sebastian's face went white. "What news?" The messenger stumbled forward, pulling a paper from his coat. "From Greystone Manor, Your Grace. There's been a fire. The East Wing is destroyed, and—" He hesitated, his face pale. Mrs. Thornton was inside. Eliza's heart stopped. Mrs. Thornton stood beside her, alive and well, her face draining of color. "My quarters are in the East Wing," she whispered. "If I'd been there—" "This was meant for you," Sebastian said, the realization hitting him like a blow. He turned to scan the crowd, his eyes landing on Wickham, who was already gone. "He tried to kill me," Eliza breathed. "He tried to kill me and make it look like an accident." Sebastian's face transformed into something terrible. "Get her out," he barked at Mrs. Thornton. "Get her somewhere safe. Now." "No," Eliza said. "Sebastian, now!" The command cracked through the church like a whip. But before anyone could move, Wickham's voice rang out from the back of the church. He'd reappeared in the doorway, and he wasn't alone anymore. He had men with him, large men, armed men. "I'm afraid no one's going anywhere," Wickham said pleasantly. "You see, there's been a development. New evidence has come to light regarding the legitimacy of this marriage. I'm here as the Duke's closest male relative to contest it formally." He smiled. "And to make sure the Duchess doesn't run before she can answer some very serious questions about her past." The church erupted into chaos, and Eliza realized with crystalline clarity that they'd walked straight into a trap. Wickham had never intended to let them salvage their reputations. He'd been planning this all along. The fire, the timing, the public accusation in a church full of witnesses, it was all designed to destroy them completely. Sebastian moved to put himself between Eliza and Wickham's men, his body tense, ready to fight. "This ends now, cousin," Wickham said, "one way or another." Eliza looked at Sebastian, at the man who'd just promised to spend his life trying to deserve her, who'd been ready to fight the whole world to protect her, and made a decision that surprised even herself. She ran, not away from the danger, toward the side door, the one she'd noticed earlier that led to the street, away from Sebastian's protection, away from the guards, away from everything. "Eliza!" Sebastian's roar echoed through the church, raw and desperate. But she was already gone, bursting through the door into the London streets, her white dress streaming behind her, her heart pounding with terror and determination. If Wickham wanted to destroy her, he'd have to catch her first. And Eliza Rowan, Duchess or not, had learned a long time ago how to survive. The London streets swallowed her whole. Eliza ran, her white dress a beacon in the gray morning light, her shoes slipping on cobblestones slick with yesterday's rain. Behind her she could hear shouting, Sebastian's voice cutting through the chaos, Wickham's men bellowing orders, the crowd spilling out of the church in confusion. She didn't look back. Her lungs burned. The corset dug into her ribs with every gasping breath. She'd never run in a dress like this before, all layers and weight and fabric designed to make women ornamental, not functional. But she'd spent her whole life working in fields and gardens, her body strong in ways society ladies weren't, and she pushed through the pain, darting down an alley between two buildings. A hand grabbed her arm. Eliza spun, ready to fight, and found herself staring at a boy, maybe 12, thin as a rail, with sharp eyes and dirt on his face. "This way, missus," he said urgently. "They're coming round the front. I know a way." She should have questioned it, should have been suspicious. But something in his eyes, a recognition, maybe, of someone who knew what it meant to survive, made her nod. "Go." He took off running, and she followed, her dress hitched up in both hands, through a maze of narrow passages and back streets that reeked of garbage and human waste. The boy moved like water, slipping through gaps she barely fit through, leading her deeper into the warrens of London's poorest districts. Finally, he stopped at a doorway so nondescript she would have walked past it without noticing. He knocked 3 times, paused, knocked twice more. The door opened. An old woman peered out, took one look at Eliza's dress, and her eyes went wide. "Tommy, what have you brought me?" "Someone who needs hiding, Gran," the boy said. "Please." The woman studied Eliza for a long moment, then stepped back. "In, quick." Eliza stumbled inside. The door shut behind her, plunging them into dim lamplight. The room was small and crowded, a family of at least 6 living in a space meant for 2, with children's faces peering from every corner. "You're the Duchess," the old woman said. It wasn't a question. Eliza's heart sank. "You've heard." "Everyone's heard. The scandal sheets have been screaming about you for weeks." The woman crossed her arms. "Question is, are you the fortune hunter they say you are, or something else?" "Something else," Eliza said, her voice raw. "I'm someone trying to survive, same as you." The woman's eyes narrowed. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Tommy says you need hiding. From who?" "From people who want to destroy me, who tried to kill me." Eliza's hands shook. "I need to get out of London. I don't know what I need. I just know I can't let them catch me." "Why'd you run from your husband?" one of the children asked. A girl, maybe 8, with tangled brown hair. "I didn't run from him," Eliza said. "I ran to protect him. If they catch me, they'll use me against him. But if I'm gone, if I disappear, he can fight back without worrying about me being a hostage." That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, the old woman said bluntly. You think a man who just stood up in a church and said he didn't deserve you is going to just let you vanish? He'll tear London apart looking for you. I know. Eliza's throat tightened. But at least he'll be alive to do it. Wickham won't stop. He'll kill anyone in his way, including Sebastian, especially Sebastian, once he has me. The woman studied her for another long moment. Then she sighed. You can stay here, for now. But you need to get out of that dress. You're a walking target. 20 minutes later, Eliza was wearing a simple brown skirt and gray blouse that belonged to one of the woman's daughters. Her hair pulled back in a plain knot, her face scrubbed clean of the powder the maid had applied that morning. She looked like she had before the marriage, like a girl who worked with her hands, not a duchess. It felt more honest. What now? Tommy asked, watching her from the corner. Now I figure out how to stop Wickham without getting anyone killed, Eliza said. But even as she said it, she had no idea how. She had no allies here, no resources, no... Wait. Tommy, she said slowly. You know the streets. You know how to get around without being seen. Of course I do. Can you get a message to someone without being caught? The boy grinned. Who do you need? Eliza pulled the wedding ring off her finger, the simple gold band Sebastian had given her during their first ceremony, not the ornate thing he'd presented at the renewal. She pressed it into Tommy's palm. Take this to Greystone House, the Duke's London residence. Give it to the head butler. His name is Graves. Tell him. She swallowed hard. Tell him the Duchess is safe and needs him to trust her. Tell him to look into the fire, not the damage, the cause, and tell him to find out who benefits from my death. That's a lot to remember, Tommy said, but his eyes were bright with excitement. Can you do it? Can I? Watch me. He was gone before she could say anything else, disappearing into the London morning like smoke. The old woman, who'd finally introduced herself as Mrs. Fletcher, brought Eliza tea and hard bread. You're either very brave or very stupid, she said, settling into a chair with a groan. Possibly both. Everyone keeps saying that, Eliza muttered. Because it's true. Mrs. Fletcher studied her. Why'd you really marry him? The Duke? Eliza looked into her tea. Because my family was drowning, and he was the only one who offered a rope. And now? Now I'm trying to figure out if I grab the rope or the anchor. Mrs. Fletcher laughed, a rough sound. You love him. I barely know him. Doesn't answer the question. Eliza closed her eyes. Did she love Sebastian? She didn't know, but she knew she'd felt something crack in her chest when he'd made those vows. Knew she'd run not to save herself, but to save him. Knew that the thought of Wickham hurting him made her want to burn the world down. Maybe, she admitted quietly. Maybe I do. Then you'd better figure out how to save both of you, Mrs. Fletcher said, because that man is going to come looking, and when he does, he'll bring hell with him. She was right. It took less than 4 hours. Eliza was helping Mrs. Fletcher's daughter wash clothes in the back room when she heard the commotion outside. Shouting, the sound of horses, doors slamming. She froze, her hands still in the soapy water. It's him, Mrs. Fletcher said from the doorway, her voice tight. You're Duke, and he's not alone. Eliza ran to the front window and peered through the grimy glass. Her heart stopped. Sebastian stood in the middle of the narrow street, surrounded by at least a dozen men, some of them his own guards, some of them rough-looking men from the docks, all of them armed. He was still in his wedding clothes, the white shirt now dirt-stained, his coat discarded, his hair disheveled. He looked wild, dangerous. He was going door to door. Please, he was saying to a shopkeeper, his voice hoarse. A woman in a white dress. Have you seen her? The shopkeeper shook his head, and Sebastian moved to the next door. And the next, working his way methodically down the street, coming closer. You have to hide, Mrs. Fletcher hissed. No. Eliza stood, her decision made. I have to talk to him. Are you insane? You just ran from him. I ran from Wickham's trap, not from him. Eliza headed for the door. And if I don't stop him now, he's going to tear this whole district apart looking for me, and someone's going to get hurt. She opened the door before Mrs. Fletcher could stop her and stepped out into the street. Sebastian was 3 houses away. He turned at the sound of the door, his eyes scanning, and then froze. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Him in his ruined wedding finery, her in borrowed clothes, the distance between them feeling like miles. Then Sebastian moved. He crossed the space in seconds, and before Eliza could say anything, he pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest so tightly she could barely breathe. "You idiot," he said, his voice breaking. "You complete and utter idiot." "I had to run," Eliza said into his shoulder. "Wickham was going to— I know what he was going to do." Sebastian pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands framing her face. "I figured it out the moment you ran. The fire wasn't random. It was supposed to kill you and make it look like an accident. When that failed, he moved to Plan B, public accusation, force me to defend you, use the chaos to— He couldn't finish. His hands were shaking. "To kill me anyway," Eliza finished quietly. "In the confusion. An accident. A tragedy. The poor Duchess, caught in the crossfire." "Yes." Sebastian's jaw clenched. "And you ran, alone, into London, with no protection, no plan." "I had a plan." "What plan?" "Tommy!" Eliza called. The boy appeared from the crowd that had gathered, Sebastian's ring in his hand. "Got your message delivered, missus. The butler said to tell you he's already on it." Sebastian stared at the ring, then at Tommy, then at Eliza. "You sent my wedding ring to my butler." "I sent him a message to investigate the fire and find out who benefits from my death," Eliza corrected. "The ring was proof I was alive and thinking clearly." "You were not thinking clearly. You were running through London in a wedding dress with assassins after you." "I was drawing them away from you." Eliza's voice rose. "If they caught me with you, they could have killed us both. But if I ran, you were safe and I had a chance to— To what? To get yourself killed? To buy you time." Eliza grabbed his shirt, her fingers twisting in the fabric. "You don't understand. Wickham doesn't just want the title. He wants you dead. And as long as I'm with you, I'm a weapon he can use. But if I'm gone, if I'm hidden, you can fight back without worrying about me being a hostage or a target or—" Sebastian kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't romantic. It was desperate and fierce and tasted like fear and fury and something that might have been love if either of them had been ready to call it that. When he pulled back, his eyes were burning. "Don't ever do that again." "Do what?" "Try to save me by sacrificing yourself." His voice shook. "I don't need saving. I need you alive. Do you understand? I need you alive." Eliza's eyes stung. "Sebastian, Tommy delivered your message," a new voice interrupted. They turned. Graves stood at the end of the street, Sebastian's butler, impeccable as always despite the chaos. "And I have information you'll want to hear. Both of you." They gathered in Mrs. Fletcher's tiny front room, Eliza, Sebastian, Graves, and Tommy, who'd insisted on staying because this is the most exciting thing that's ever happened. Mrs. Fletcher shooed her children into the back and stood guard at the door. Graves laid out a series of papers on the scarred wooden table. "The fire at Greystone Manor was deliberately set. I found evidence of accelerants in the East Wing, but more importantly," he pulled out another document. "I found the deed to a property in Lord Wickham's name, a warehouse on the docks. I took the liberty of investigating. And," Sebastian's voice was tight, "and I found crates, dozens of them, all addressed to various estates across England." Graves met Sebastian's eyes. "They contain documents, Your Grace. Forgeries. Letters supposedly from the Duchess to various men, suggesting affairs. Bills from physicians implying she sought treatment for delicate conditions. All dated before your marriage." Eliza's stomach dropped. He was building a case to prove I was everything the rumors said. "Worse," Graves said grimly. "Some of the letters are addressed to you, Your Grace. Letters you never sent, suggesting you knew about her indiscretions and married her anyway as part of some blackmail scheme." Sebastian's face went white. "He was going to destroy both of us." "He still is," Graves said, "unless we move first." "How?" Eliza asked. "Even if we expose the forgeries, he'll just claim we made them up to defend ourselves. It's his word against ours, and he has connections. Not anymore, he doesn't. a new voice said from the doorway. They all turned. Lady Hartwell stood there leaning on her cane, her elderly face set in grim lines. Behind her stood at least a dozen other society matrons, all of them dressed for battle in their finest. "My lady," Sebastian said, clearly shocked, "what are you doing here?" "What I should have done weeks ago," Lady Hartwell said. "Listening to my instincts instead of gossip." She looked at Eliza. "I've been watching you, girl. Watching how you handle yourself in society. You make mistakes, yes. You're rough around the edges, but you're not a liar. And you're certainly not the scheming fortune hunter Wickham's been painting you as." "How did you find us?" Eliza asked. "I followed your husband. Half of London followed your husband. The man was not subtle." Lady Hartwell moved into the room, the other women filing in behind her. "When I saw where he was searching in the slums, asking shopkeepers and street children, I realized something. A woman who was truly the person those scandal sheets described would have run to her family, or to a lover, or anywhere that offered comfort and money." She looked at Eliza. "You ran to the people who have nothing, because that's who you've always cared about." Eliza's throat tightened. "I don't understand." "I spoke to some people," Lady Hartwell said, "after that first ball. I was curious about you, wanted to know if the rumors had any truth, so I sent inquiries to your home county." She pulled out a letter. "Do you know what I found? Stories, dozens of them, about a girl who helped tenant farmers repair cottages, who taught children to read, who sat with the dying and birthed babies and never asked for anything in return." She smiled slightly. "The people who knew you best said you were stubborn and too outspoken and completely impossible, but they also said you were the kindest person they'd ever met." Eliza couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "That's not the profile of a fortune hunter," Lady Hartwell continued. "That's the profile of someone who actually gives a damn about people." "So when Wickham made his accusations today, I started asking questions, and I found some very interesting answers." She nodded to one of the other women, who stepped forward with her own papers. "Lord Wickham has debts," the woman said. Lady Morrison, Eliza remembered, wife of a banking magnate. "Significant debts, to some very dangerous people. He's been borrowing against his expectations of inheriting the Greystone title for years. If he doesn't get that title, and soon, his creditors will destroy him." "Which means he's desperate," Sebastian said slowly. "Desperate enough to commit arson, murder, and forgery," Graves added, gesturing to the documents, "all of which are criminal offenses. If we can prove he created those documents, if we can tie him to the fire, we can destroy him before he destroys us," Eliza finished. "Exactly," Lady Hartwell said. "But we need to move quickly. He'll be expecting you to hide, to defend yourselves quietly. Instead, we attack. Publicly. Tonight." "How?" Sebastian asked. Lady Hartwell's smile was sharp as a blade. "We're hosting a ball." The next 6 hours were a blur. Lady Hartwell's townhouse was transformed into a battlefield, servants running everywhere, invitations being hand-delivered across London, whispers spreading through society like wildfire. The Duchess of Greystone would be appearing that evening. The scandal would be addressed, and everyone who mattered would be there to witness it, including Wickham. "He won't be able to resist," Lady Hartwell said, overseeing the preparations with military precision. "His ego won't allow it. He'll come expecting to see you humiliated. Instead, we'll destroy him." Eliza stood in a bedroom that wasn't hers, being dressed by maids who kept shooting her nervous glances. The gown was deep green, elegant but simple, with none of the frills and flourishes that usually marked society fashion. It looked like armor. She felt like a soldier preparing for war. Sebastian found her as the sun was setting, standing at the window watching London prepare for darkness. He'd changed into fresh evening clothes, his hair combed back, his face carefully neutral again. But his eyes weren't neutral. They were terrified. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "We can still run, leave London, leave England, start over somewhere he can't reach us. And let him win?" Eliza turned to face him. "Let him destroy everything we fought for? Everyone who's put their trust in us?" She shook her head. "No. We finish this. Tonight." Sebastian crossed to her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. If this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, then we'll deal with it together, Eliza said firmly. No more running. No more trying to protect each other by pushing each other away. We're in this together now, for better or worse. Isn't that what we promised? Sebastian's laugh was shaky. I don't remember the vows including for public destruction by a murderous cousin. It was in the fine print, Eliza said, and was rewarded with a real smile. He kissed her then, soft and careful, like she was something precious that might break. I love you, he said against her lips. I know it's terrible timing. I know we have a battle ahead, but I need you to know I love you. Eliza's heart cracked open. I love you too, even though you're cold and impossible and you drive me insane. Especially because of that, Sebastian murmured. Especially because of that, she agreed. The ballroom was packed when they arrived. Every member of London society crammed into Lady Hartwell's house, all of them buzzing with speculation and malicious anticipation. Eliza could feel their eyes on her as she entered on Sebastian's arm, could hear the whispers starting up like a swarm of wasps. And there, near the center of the room, stood Edmund Wickham, his smile confident and cruel. Lady Hartwell stepped forward, raising her hands for silence. The room quieted. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, she said, her voice carrying easily across the space. I know there have been many rumors circulating about the Duke and Duchess of Greystone. Tonight we will address them, directly. A ripple of excitement went through the crowd. Lord Wickham, Lady Hartwell continued, has made some very serious accusations. He claims the Duchess is a fortune hunter who trapped the Duke into marriage, that she was involved with other men before her wedding, that the marriage itself is illegitimate. She paused. These are grave charges. If true, they would indeed cast doubt on the succession of the Greystone title. Wickham stepped forward, his confidence growing. I'm glad you're finally taking this seriously, Lady Hartwell. I've been trying to protect my cousin from... However, Lady Hartwell interrupted, her voice sharp as ice. I have some questions about your evidence, Lord Wickham, specifically about the documents you've been circulating to support your claims. Wickham's smile faltered. What documents? The ones in the warehouse you own on the docks, Graves said, stepping forward with the papers. The forged letters, the falsified bills, the entire collection of fabricated evidence you've been preparing to destroy the Duchess's reputation. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Wickham's face went red. That's a lie. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? Lady Morrison stepped forward with her own evidence. Because the warehouse deed is in your name, and the handwriting on these letters from the Duchess matches samples of your own writing that I obtained from your creditors. My creditors? Wickham's voice rose. You had no right. I had every right to investigate a man making criminal accusations, Lady Morrison said coldly. And what I found was fascinating. You owe over £50,000 to various lenders. Money borrowed against your expectation of inheriting the Greystone title. Money you'll never be able to repay unless the Duke dies without an heir. The crowd was in an uproar now. Wickham looked around wildly, seeing the trap closing. You tried to kill her, Sebastian said, his voice cutting through the chaos. He stepped forward, and Eliza saw the cold fury in his eyes, the same fury he'd shown the groom who beat the horse. You set fire to my estate, trying to make it look like an accident. When that failed, you spread lies. And when the lies weren't enough, you planned to murder her in public and claim it was chaos from the scandal. You can't prove any of that, Wickham snarled. Actually, we can, Graves said, producing more documents. I found the man you hired to set the fire. He was very talkative once I explained that he could either testify against you or hang alone for attempted murder of a duchess. Wickham's face went from red to white. This is a setup. You're all conspiring against me because you're a murderer and a forger, Eliza said, her voice ringing clear across the ballroom. She stepped forward, meeting Wickham's wild eyes. You tried to kill me because I was in your way, because I represented everything you couldn't control, but you made a mistake. What mistake? Wickham spat. You assumed I'd break, Eliza said. You assumed that if you hit me hard enough, I'd shatter, that I'd run away or hide or let fear make me weak. She moved closer, and she saw fear flicker in his eyes. But I grew up poor, Lord Wickham. I grew up knowing that survival meant being harder than the world trying to break you. So when you came at me with your lies and your fires and your schemes, all you did was prove that I was right about you all along." "Right about what?" "That you're weak," Eliza said softly. "You hide it behind money and titles and pretty words. But underneath, you're just a coward who can't face the world without cheating." Wickham lunged at her. Sebastian moved faster, catching him by the throat and slamming him back against a pillar. The entire ballroom gasped. "Touch her," Sebastian said, his voice deadly quiet, "and I will break every bone in your body before I hand you to the magistrate." Wickham struggled, gasping. "You can't. You have no proof." "We have all the proof we need," Lady Hartwell said. "The forged documents, the witness to the arson, your debts, and most importantly," she gestured to the crowd, "we have 500 witnesses who just heard you try to attack the Duchess in a ballroom." The fight went out of Wickham all at once. He sagged in Sebastian's grip, his face crumpling. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he whispered. I just needed the title, the money. Everything was going to fall apart if I didn't get it." "So you tried to murder an innocent woman," Sebastian said, his voice still cold. He released Wickham, letting him slide down the pillar to the floor. "You're pathetic." He turned to Graves. "Send for the magistrate. I'm filing formal charges. Attempted murder, arson, forgery, anything else we can make stick." "Yes, Your Grace." Two of Sebastian's guards hauled Wickham to his feet, dragging him toward the door. The crowd parted, silent now, watching the wreckage of a man who'd gambled everything and lost. Lady Hartwell stepped forward, addressing the room. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. Gossip is a weapon, but truth is armor. And anyone who tries to destroy someone based on lies," she looked at the space where Wickham had been. "Well, you've seen what happens." Slowly, someone started clapping. Then another person. Then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was applauding, the sound thunderous in the enclosed space. Eliza stood frozen, not sure what to do. Sebastian took her hand, squeezing gently. "Wave," he murmured. "They're applauding you." "I don't know how, just lift your hand. Smile. Let them see you're not afraid." So Eliza did. She raised her hand, managed something that probably looked more like a grimace than a smile, and let the wave of approval wash over her. She'd won. They'd won. Later, after the crowd had dispersed and the magistrate had taken Wickham away in chains, after Lady Hartwell had promised to help repair Eliza's reputation in society, and Lady Morrison had offered financial advice, after all the excitement and terror and chaos had finally settled into something like peace, Eliza and Sebastian stood alone in Lady Hartwell's garden. The London sky was black with coal smoke, no stars visible, but Eliza didn't care. She was alive. Sebastian was alive. They were both still standing. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Sebastian pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "Now we go home. To Greystone. We repair the damage to the estate. We get back to the work we were doing before Wickham tried to destroy us." He paused. "And we figure out what kind of marriage we actually want to have." "I thought we already figured that out." "We figured out that we love each other," Sebastian said. "That's a start. But there's a lot more to work out. Like whether you want to keep helping the tenants directly or if you want to work on larger reforms. Like whether you want to be involved in my business ventures or keep your independence. Like, Sebastian," Eliza interrupted, pulling back to look at him. "We don't have to figure it all out tonight." "I know, but I want to." His hands cupped her face. "I want to build something real with you. Not the contract we started with. Something better. Something honest." "Like we promised," Eliza said. "Honesty, freedom, trust." "Exactly like we promised." Eliza smiled, real and wide. "Then let's go home and start building." They left London the next morning before the sun rose, escaping the city while society still slept. The carriage rolled north toward Greystone, toward the harsh, beautiful land that had become home. And somewhere along the journey, as Eliza dozed against Sebastian's shoulder, and he held her like she might disappear if he let go, both of them began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could build something that lasted. Not perfect, never perfect, but real, and honest, and earned. And for two people who'd started with nothing but a cold proposal and desperation, that was more than either of them had ever dared to hope for. The first snow came early that year, dusting the hills around Greystone in white by mid-November. Eliza stood at the window of her study now, not just a room she borrowed, watching the flakes fall and thinking about how much had changed in 6 months. The East Wing was rebuilt. Better than before, actually. Sebastian had used the insurance money and then some, upgrading the staff quarters with proper heating and windows that didn't let in drafts, Mrs. Thornton had cried when she saw her new rooms, though she'd tried to hide it. The estate was thriving. The tenants' cottages all had sound roofs now. The irrigation system Sebastian had been planning was installed and working. The village had a new school, Eliza's project, funded partly by the Greystone coffers and partly by donations she'd solicited from the society ladies who'd helped destroy Wickham. And the Rowan estate was recovering. Slowly, painfully, but recovering. With the debts cleared and some strategic investments Sebastian had arranged, her father was actually managing the land again instead of drinking himself into oblivion. Her mother had stopped looking at Eliza like a stranger. Anne had gotten engaged to a decent man, not wealthy, but kind, which mattered more. Beatrice was talking about becoming a teacher. Margaret still wasn't speaking to her. That hurt more than Eliza wanted to admit. "You're brooding again," Sebastian said from the doorway. Eliza turned, found him leaning against the frame, his shirt sleeves rolled up despite the cold, his hair disheveled from running his hands through it. He'd been working in his study all morning, going through the quarterly reports. "I'm thinking," she corrected. "Same thing with you." He crossed the room, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What about?" "Margaret. My family. Whether I made the right choice." "Did you?" Eliza leaned back against him, solid and warm. "I don't know. I saved them, but I also broke something. I'm not sure it can be fixed." "Give her time," Sebastian said quietly. "She's grieving, not for what she lost, but for what she thought her life was going to be." "How do you know that?" "Because I did the same thing." He turned her to face him, his gray eyes serious. "When my father died, I thought I knew exactly what my life would be. Cold, controlled, safe. Then you showed up and shattered every plan I had." He smiled slightly. "I grieved for that life. Even though it would have been miserable, it was familiar. Letting it go was terrifying." "Do you regret it?" Eliza asked. "Letting it go?" "Not for a second." He kissed her forehead. "But I understand why Margaret's struggling. You changed her story without asking permission. That's hard to forgive, even when the change is for the better." A knock at the door interrupted them. Graves appeared, looking apologetic. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace, but you have visitors." "Who?" Sebastian asked, not releasing Eliza. "The Rowan family. All of them." Eliza's heart stuttered. "All of them?" "Including Miss Margaret," Graves confirmed. Eliza and Sebastian exchanged glances. Then she straightened, smoothing her skirts. "Show them to the drawing room. We'll be down in a moment." The Rowan family looked out of place in Greystone's massive drawing room, huddled together near the fire like refugees seeking shelter. Edward stood stiff and uncomfortable in his best coat. Catherine perched on the edge of a chair, her face carefully neutral. Anne and Beatrice sat close together, whispering, and Margaret stood by the window, staring out at the snow-covered grounds, her back to the room. "Father," Eliza said, entering with Sebastian at her side. "Mother, this is unexpected." "We should have come sooner," Edward said, his voice rough. "Should have thanked you properly for what you did, for saving us." "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, we do." Catherine stood, and Eliza saw tears in her mother's eyes. "We were drowning. You threw us a lifeline, and all we did was judge you for how you did it. That was wrong." Eliza's throat tightened. "You were scared. I understand." "Understanding doesn't make it right." Anne stepped forward, her young face earnest. "You saved us, Eliza. All of us. And we treated you like you'd done something shameful instead of something brave." "I didn't feel brave," Eliza said quietly. "I felt terrified." "Which makes it braver," Beatrice added. "You were scared, and you did it anyway." Eliza looked at Margaret, still standing by the window. "What about you? Do you agree with them?" Margaret turned slowly, and Eliza saw that her sister had been crying. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face blotchy. "No," Margaret said, and Eliza's heart sank. "I don't agree with them." The room went silent. Then Margaret crossed the space between them and pulled Eliza into a fierce hug. "I'm furious with you," Margaret said, her voice muffled against Eliza's shoulder. "I'm angry and hurt, and I've spent 6 months hating you for taking what I thought I wanted. But I also—" She pulled back, her hands gripping Eliza's arms. "I also know you saved my life. Because if I'd married him, the Duke, it would have been a disaster. I would have been miserable. He would have been miserable. And we'd have destroyed each other trying to pretend otherwise." "Margaret, let me finish." Margaret took a shaky breath. "I wanted to marry him for the wrong reasons. To save the family, yes, but also to prove I was valuable, that I mattered, that I could do something important." She smiled sadly. "But you did something more important than I ever could have. You didn't just save us financially. You showed me that there are more ways to matter than marrying well. You help people. You build things. You make the world better just by being in it." She wiped her eyes. "I'm still angry. I'm still hurt. But I'm also proud. And I'm sorry it took me this long to say it." Eliza couldn't speak. She just pulled Margaret close again, both of them crying now, 6 months of hurt and fear and love pouring out between them. Sebastian cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should give them some privacy." "No," Eliza said, pulling back and wiping her face. "No, stay, all of you, because there's something I need to say too." She took a breath, looking at each member of her family in turn. "I didn't just marry Sebastian to save you. I want you to know that. Yes, the money was part of it. Yes, I knew it would help, but I also—" She glanced at Sebastian, who was watching her with those steady gray eyes. "I also saw a chance to build something different, something better than what we'd all been taught to expect. A partnership instead of a transaction, freedom instead of a cage." She looked back at her family. "I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I broke the plan you'd all made for your lives. But I'm not sorry I made the choice I did, because it gave me this." She gestured around the room. "It gave me a home where I can be myself. Work that matters. And," she reached for Sebastian's hand, "someone who sees me for who I actually am, not who I'm supposed to be." Edward stepped forward, his eyes shining. "You were always the bravest of all of us. We just couldn't see it because you were covered in mud most of the time." Eliza laughed, the sound wet and broken. "I'm still covered in mud most of the time." "Yes, but now you're a duchess covered in mud," Catherine said, smiling, "which makes it eccentric instead of shameful." They stayed for dinner. It was awkward at first, too many feelings still raw, too many months of silence to bridge with small talk. But slowly, carefully, they began to rebuild. Anne told stories about her fiancé. Beatrice talked about her plans to open a school for girls in their county. Edward discussed the new farming techniques he was trying. Catherine asked Eliza about the village school, genuinely interested instead of politely condescending, and Margaret sat beside Eliza, their shoulders touching, not saying much but not leaving either. It wasn't perfect. There were still silences that hurt, still moments when old resentments flickered across faces, but it was real, and it was a start. After they left, promising to visit again soon, Eliza found Sebastian in his study, staring at a letter with an expression she couldn't read. "What is it?" she asked. He looked up, something between amusement and disbelief on his face. "Wickham's creditors are suing his estate. They're going to strip him of everything, titles, lands, money. He'll be penniless when he gets out of prison." "If he gets out of prison." "If," Sebastian agreed. "The Crown is taking the attempted murder of a duchess very seriously. His barrister is talking about 20 years minimum." Eliza sat down across from him. "Do you feel anything, knowing he's destroyed?" Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. "Relief. That he can't hurt you anymore. That he can't hurt anyone anymore." He looked at her. "But also, pity. He had everything, title, money, opportunities, and he threw it away because he was too greedy and too scared to just live with what he had." "You're not like him," Eliza said firmly. "You know that, right?" "I could have been." Sebastian's voice was low. "If I'd stayed the way I was." cold, closed off, seeing people as tools instead of humans. I was on that path when you met me. But you weren't on it when you chose me, Eliza pointed out. You saw me. You listened. You let me challenge you. That's the opposite of Wickham. Because you wouldn't let me be like him. Sebastian stood, crossing to her, pulling her to her feet. You pushed and fought and refused to let me hide, even when it would have been easier to just accept the cold bastard I was pretending to be. Someone had to call you on your bullshit, Eliza said. He laughed, the sound genuine and warm. That someone being you is the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though I'm stubborn and impossible and covered in mud half the time? Especially because of that. They stood there in the quiet of his study, holding each other, the fire crackling and the snow falling outside and the world feeling, for the first time in months, like it might actually be safe. The next morning brought another visitor, this one unexpected and infinitely more welcome. Tommy appeared at the kitchen door, skinnier than Eliza remembered, his clothes threadbare despite the cold. Mrs. Thornton nearly had him thrown out before Eliza heard the commotion and came running. "Tommy!" She grabbed the boy before the footman could escort him away. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for work, Your Grace." He ducked his head, suddenly shy. "Gran said I should ask proper instead of just showing up, but I didn't know how else to find you and—" "Slow down." Eliza knelt so she was eye level with him. "What happened? Is your grandmother all right?" "She's fine, but London's getting rough. Too many people, not enough work. She said maybe you'd remember me, maybe you'd have something." He looked up, his eyes hopeful and scared. "I'm good with horses, and I can read a bit, and I work hard, I swear." Eliza looked at Mrs. Thornton, who was watching with interest. "Do we need another groom?" "We could always use another pair of hands in the stables," Mrs. Thornton said, "if he's willing to work." "I am," Tommy said eagerly. "I'll work harder than anyone, I promise." "Then you're hired," Eliza said. "Mrs. Thornton will show you to the staff quarters. You'll eat with the other grooms, train with the head groom, and if I hear you're not working hard or causing trouble, you're out. Understood?" "Yes, Your Grace." Tommy looked like he might cry. Thank you so much." "Don't thank me yet," Eliza said, smiling. "Wait until you've shoveled your first month of horse manure. Then we'll see if you still think this was a good idea." But Tommy was already grinning, following Mrs. Thornton toward the stables, chattering excitedly about which horses he'd get to work with. Sebastian found Eliza watching from the window, a smile on her face. "Another stray?" he asked, amused. "He helped me when I had nothing," Eliza said. "Now I'm helping him. That's how it should work." "You're going to fill this estate with strays, aren't you?" "Probably." She looked at him. "Is that a problem?" "Not even a little bit." He wrapped his arms around her waist. "I married a woman who cares about people. I can't exactly complain when she acts like it." Over the next months, Eliza's influence spread through Greystone like spring growth. The village school expanded, adding classes for adults who'd never learned to read. The tenant cottages got small gardens where families could grow their own vegetables. The orphanage in town received regular supplies and visits from the Duchess herself, who wasn't above rolling up her sleeves and helping with repairs. Society noticed. At first with scandal, the Duchess of Greystone working like a common laborer, but then with grudging respect as they saw the results. The Greystone lands were thriving. The tenants were healthy and productive. The village was growing, and slowly, other estates started copying the model. Lady Hartwell visited in the spring, inspecting everything with her sharp eyes. She found Eliza in the village teaching a reading class to a group of women. "You've started a revolution," Lady Hartwell said when Eliza finished the lesson. "I've started a school," Eliza corrected, washing chalk dust from her hands. "Same thing," Lady Hartwell gestured to the village around them. "Do you know how many estates have contacted me asking about your methods? How many ladies are suddenly interested in tenant welfare and education programs? That's good, isn't it?" "It's remarkable." Lady Hartwell studied her. "You're changing how people think about nobility, about what it means to have power and money. You're showing them it's not just about prestige, it's about responsibility." "I'm just doing what needs to be done," Eliza said. "Exactly," Lady Hartwell smiled. "And that's why it's working. You're not doing it for credit or recognition. You're doing it because you can't stand to see people suffer when you have the means to help." She paused. "That's true nobility," not the title, the character. That night, Eliza told Sebastian about the conversation while they lay in bed, her head on his chest, his fingers playing with her hair. She's right, Sebastian said. You are changing things. We're changing things, Eliza corrected. I couldn't do any of this without your support, your money, your willingness to let me try. My willingness to get out of your way, you mean? That too. She smiled against his skin. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for being trustworthy. He kissed the top of her head. And for calling me a bastard that first day. If you hadn't, we might have ended up in a perfectly polite, perfectly miserable marriage instead of this. This being chaotic and messy, and nothing like I planned. He pulled her closer. This being perfect. Summer brought news that Wickham had died in prison, an infection, the report said, from an injury sustained in a fight with another inmate. Sebastian read the letter twice, then set it aside without comment. How do you feel? Eliza asked. Relieved, Sebastian said honestly. Not that he's dead. I wouldn't have wished that on him, but that it's over, that he can't come back and try again. Do you think he would have? If he'd survived? Yes. Sebastian's voice was certain. He would have spent every day in prison planning revenge, and when he got out, he would have come for us. Some people can't let go of hate. It eats them alive. Eliza thought about that, about hate and forgiveness and all the complicated spaces between. I'm glad I'm not like that. You're not capable of it, Sebastian said. You get angry, yes, but you don't hold on to it. You let it go and move forward. Is that a good thing or a weakness? It's the thing that saved both of us, Sebastian said. You could have held on to your anger at me for that first proposal, for treating your family like livestock, but you didn't. You gave me a chance to prove I was better than my worst moment. He turned to look at her. That's strength, Eliza, not weakness. Autumn came, painting the hills in gold and red, and with it came the realization that Eliza had been avoiding for months, too busy to notice the signs until they became impossible to ignore. She was pregnant. Mrs. Thornton confirmed it, grinning wide enough to split her face. About time, the housekeeper said. I was wondering when you two would get around to it. We've been busy, Eliza said weakly, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach. Clearly not that busy. Mrs. Thornton's expression softened. How do you feel? Terrified, Eliza admitted. This was the deal. This was what Sebastian wanted. An heir. Once I give him that, she trailed off. Once you give him that what? Mrs. Thornton prompted. I don't know. Does the arrangement end? Do we go back to being separate? Do I become just the mother of his heir instead of... She couldn't finish. Instead of his wife? Mrs. Thornton said gently. Child, have you looked at that man lately? Have you seen the way he looks at you? Like what? Like you hung the moon and stars just for him. Mrs. Thornton patted her hand. This baby isn't the end of your marriage. It's the beginning of something new, something neither of you planned for. What's that? A family, Mrs. Thornton said simply. Telling Sebastian was harder than fighting Wickham had been. Eliza found him in the estate office, going over the harvest reports. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching him work, remembering the cold man who'd walked into her family's parlor and offered to buy a wife. He wasn't that man anymore. Or maybe he was, underneath, but he'd let her see past the ice to the person beneath. Are you going to stand there all day or come in? He asked without looking up. How did you know I was here? I always know when you're here. He set down his pen, turning to face her. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. She took a breath. I'm pregnant. Sebastian went very still. You're certain? Mrs. Thornton confirmed it this morning. He stood slowly, crossing to her with careful, deliberate steps, like he was afraid she might disappear. How do you feel? Scared, happy, confused. She met his eyes. What about you? You got what you wanted. An heir. Is that what you think? Sebastian's voice was rough. That all I wanted was an heir? That was the deal. The deal was bullshit, Sebastian interrupted. The deal was what I told myself because I was too much of a coward to admit I wanted more than that. That I wanted you. Not just as the mother of my children, but as my partner, my wife. The person I wake up next to and fall asleep beside and build a life with. He cupped her face in his hands. Yes, I'm happy about the baby, but not because it fulfills some contract, because it's ours, because we made it together, because it's proof that this thing between us is real. Eliza's eyes burned. I thought once I gave you an heir, you'd let me go, that I'd have my freedom and you'd have what you needed and we'd just coexist. Do you want that? Sebastian asked quietly. Do you want to be free of me? No. The word came out fierce and certain. No, I want this. I want you. I want our messy, chaotic, nothing like we planned life. I just didn't know if you wanted the same thing. I want everything, Sebastian said. I want you covered in mud teaching village children to read. I want you arguing with me about tenant policies. I want you stealing all the blankets and snoring in my ear. I do not snore. You absolutely snore, Sebastian said, smiling. I want all of it. The good, the bad, the parts that drive me insane. I want to build something with you that's bigger than either of us alone. And if that's not freedom, I don't know what is. Eliza kissed him, tasting salt from tears she hadn't realized she was crying. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. Good, Sebastian murmured against her lips. Love should be a little scary, means it matters. The baby came in late spring, arriving early and angry, screaming loud enough to wake the entire household. A boy, with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, squalling his displeasure at the cold world he'd been thrust into. Sebastian held him with shaking hands, this tiny creature who was somehow his, looking terrified and awed in equal measure. What do we call him? Eliza asked from the bed, exhausted but smiling. I don't know. I didn't think that far ahead. You had 9 months. I was busy panicking, Sebastian said. He looked at his son, this small, perfect thing, and felt something crack open in his chest. Edward, after your father. He deserves to have something named after him survive. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. He'd like that. And James, after my mother's father, the one decent person in my family before you showed up. Edward James Hale, Eliza said, testing the name. It's good, strong. Like his mother, Sebastian said. The christening was a small affair, just family and close friends. The Rowans came north for it, Margaret holding the baby with careful hands while Anne and Beatrice cooed over him. Lady Hartwell attended, pronouncing the child adequately formed, which was high praise from her. Mrs. Thornton cried through the whole ceremony, and Tommy, now a full groom and growing like a weed, watched from the back with pride on his face, like he'd helped create this miracle himself. Afterward, while the guests mingled and the baby slept obliviously through the attention, Eliza found herself standing in the garden, looking out at the estate she'd helped build. The fields were green and thriving. The village was prosperous. The people were healthy and educated and had hope for the future. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems to solve, still work to be done, still days when she felt overwhelmed by the weight of it all. But it was real. And it was theirs. Hiding? Sebastian asked, appearing at her side with 2 glasses of wine. Thinking. She took a glass, leaning into his warmth. About how different everything is from where we started. Regrets? Not one. She looked at him, this man who'd offered to buy her like livestock and instead given her everything she'd never known she wanted. You? Only that I didn't find you sooner, Sebastian said. Think of all the time we wasted being miserable separately when we could have been miserable together. Eliza laughed. We're not miserable. No, Sebastian agreed, wrapping his arm around her waist. We're really not. They stood there as the sun set, painting the sky in gold and purple, the sounds of celebration drifting from the house behind them. Inside, their son slept in his grandmother's arms. Around them, the estate thrived. Ahead of them, years of work and love and chaos stretched out like a promise. It wasn't the life either of them had imagined. It was better. Years later, when people asked Eliza how she'd gone from a nobody to one of the most influential duchesses in England, she never knew quite what to say. The truth was too complicated, too messy, too full of fear and mistakes and moments when she'd almost given up. So instead she'd smile and say, I married a man who thought people were problems to be solved. and I convinced him we were worth solving together. And Sebastian, standing beside her, gray hair at his temples now, lines around his eyes from laughter instead of coldness, would add, "She didn't convince me. She just refused to let me hide anymore." "Same thing," Eliza would say. "Not at all," Sebastian would argue. And their children, 3 of them eventually, Edward and his sisters Catherine and Grace, would roll their eyes at their parents bickering, not understanding yet that this was what love looked like when it was built on honesty instead of illusion. That it was loud and messy and full of arguments and mud and laughter. That it was choosing each other every day, even when it was hard. That it was taking a cold proposal and turning it into something warm and alive and real. Greystone Manor stood for another 2 centuries, its walls strong against northern storms. Its legacy built not on conquest or cruelty, but on a girl who'd refused to be bought and a man who'd learned that control was nothing compared to partnership. And in the village below, in the school that bore Eliza's name, children learned to read and write and dream of futures their grandparents never could have imagined. All because someone had once been brave enough to call a duke a bastard. And because that duke had been wise enough to listen.